On their wedding night, the millionaire completely lost control. Dominated by the enchantment of an innocent young woman, he didn't stop until dawn, revealing a passion no one thought possible. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to discover what happened after that unforgettable night. The morning light filtered through the silk curtains of the modernist penthouse overlooking Manhattan, casting golden patterns on Eleanor's bare skin. She remained motionless, eyes open, contemplating the ceiling, while listening to Gareth's steady breathing beside her. There was something hypnotic in that sound, something that contradicted everything she had expected from this arranged marriage. Sometimes fate weaves its threads so subtly that we don't realize we're being guided exactly where we need to be, thought Eleanor, remembering her grandmother's words. The man sleeping beside her, the powerful New York businessman known throughout the city as the Glacier for his coldness in business, had shown a completely unexpected side during their wedding night. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts with glacial indifference, had moved over her body with an almost religious devotion. His lips, habituated to pronouncing direct orders and astronomical figures, had whispered her name among sweet words in a mixture of accents. Outside the window, New York awakened with the characteristic sounds of metal security gates rising, cafes opening, and the distant hum of traffic beginning to intensify. The Empire State Building stood majestic on the horizon, catching the first rays of the sun. 6 months ago, Eleanor had entered Gareth Prescott's office in elegant Tribeca, with downcast eyes and trembling hands. Her father, owner of a small traditional quilting studio in a rural town outside Savannah, Georgia, that traced back 5 generations, was on the verge of bankruptcy. The marriage proposal from the New York businessman had arrived like an unexpected lifeline, capital to save the family business in exchange for a wife who wouldn't complicate his meticulously organized life. What Gareth didn't know was that Eleanor had orchestrated every step of this encounter with the fierce determination that characterized women from the South. For 2 years, she had studied the profiles of potential saviors for the family business, and he met all the conditions. Immensely rich, solitary, and according to her research, tired of superficial relationships with women from his social circle. The marriage contract is simple, Gareth had said that day, barely looking at her. Discretion, presence at social events when required, and no interference in my personal or professional affairs. Now, as she observed her husband's sleeping profile in the dawn light, Eleanor felt a tightness in her chest. The perfect plan had an unexpected flaw. She hadn't contemplated falling in love with the man she intended to use as financial salvation. Breakfast in the Prescott penthouse was served punctually at 7:30 each morning. In the first days after the wedding, Eleanor had respected the schedule with military precision, fearful of altering her new husband's established routines. However, this morning she dared to break the protocol. When Gareth entered the dining room, he found the table empty. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, but there were no signs of the usual breakfast or his wife. He frowned, consulting his platinum watch. 7:32. Punctuality was sacred in his world. "Eleanor?" he called, his tone attempting to disguise irritation. "On the terrace," replied a melodious voice with that southern accent that inexplicably had begun to please him. He found her sitting on the terrace floor, on a vibrant southern quilted blanket that clashed completely with the penthouse's minimalist decor. Before her, she had arranged an informal breakfast, biscuits and gravy, fresh fruit, and a pot of steeping tea that perfumed the environment. "What is this?" he asked, stopping at the threshold. Eleanor looked up. Her dark eyes reflected a mixture of determination and vulnerability that disconcerted Gareth. "In the South, we sometimes have breakfast in the sun," she answered simply. "I thought you might like to try something different." Gareth wanted to protest. His schedule was perfectly calculated. Formal breakfast at 7:30, email review at 8, video conference with investors at 8:30. There was no room for romantic improvisations or folksy traditions. However, something about the image of Eleanor sitting on that quilt, with the morning sun illuminating her face and the Manhattan skyline as a backdrop, left him speechless. He sat beside her, uncomfortable at first, as if he had forgotten how to relax. "My grandmother says biscuits taste better when they're shared," she commented as she offered him a portion. "In Georgia, meals are sacred, not just for the food but for the conversations that accompany them." "My schedule usually doesn't have room for conversations during breakfast," he replied honestly, but without his usual coldness. Eleanor smiled, and it was as if the southern sun had momentarily illuminated the terrace. "Maybe that's the problem, Gareth. You have a schedule for breathing but not for living." The observation, said without malice but with crystal clarity, pierced the businessman's defenses. None of his advisors, partners, or temporary lovers had ever dared to question his lifestyle with such frankness. During that hour stolen from routine, Gareth discovered that his young wife wasn't just beautiful and sweet as he had superficially assumed. As she spoke about her family traditions, southern legends, and the secrets of traditional quilting, she revealed a vivacious intelligence and wisdom that seemed to transcend her age. Back in his office, Gareth found himself distracted during the video conference. His mind kept returning to the image of Eleanor, passionately explaining how each pattern in traditional southern quilts had a meaning, a history that traced back centuries. For the first time in years, he wondered if his perfectly structured life was really as perfect as he had always believed. Gareth's office on the 20th floor of the most emblematic building in the financial district was a monument to minimalism and efficiency. Glass, steel, and noble woods created an imposing environment that intimidated visitors and employees alike. From there, the New York businessman controlled a diversified empire: technology, renewable energy, real estate, and most recently, a modest traditional quilting business in rural Georgia. That afternoon, while reviewing the reports of Eleanor's family business, something caught his attention. The numbers didn't match with the imminent bankruptcy story they had presented to him. Certainly the quilting studio faced difficulties, but it wasn't on the verge of collapse as they had led him to believe. With a furrowed brow, he delved deeper into the documents. He discovered rejected loans, denied financing requests, but also a surprisingly sophisticated modernization plan that had been presented to several banks. A plan that carried the signature of E. Beaumont. Eleanor. The discovery left him stunned. His wife, whom he had underestimated, considering her a simple decorative piece in his perfectly ordered life, had developed a complex business strategy to save the family business, a strategy that banks, in their myopia, had rejected. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Beaumont is here for the meeting," announced his secretary, Eleanor's father. Gareth quickly put away the documents and prepared for the encounter. Jeremiah Beaumont was the antithesis of the modern businessman, a craftsman with calloused hands, skin weathered by the southern sun, and a serene dignity that no economic difficulty had managed to erode. "My son-in-law," greeted Jeremiah with a slight nod, his southern accent marking each syllable. "Thank you for receiving me without prior notice." "Please sit down," responded Gareth, studying the man with new eyes. "How is Eleanor?" A genuine smile illuminated the craftsman's face. "My daughter has always been extraordinary, but since being with you she seems different, more focused, more determined. She's taken a liking to you, something we didn't expect." Jeremiah's frankness disarmed Gareth. New Yorkers, accustomed to circumspection and calculation, rarely spoke with such transparency about emotional matters. "I've come to talk to you about something important," continued Jeremiah. "I know Eleanor told you our studio was on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was to some extent. But there's something she doesn't know, something I've kept secret." From a worn portfolio, he extracted an old folder. Inside were photographs of exceptional quilt pieces and yellowed documents with official seals. "This is our true heritage, 5 unique pieces created by my great-grandmother during the revival of Southern quilting in the 19th century. They're catalogued as cultural heritage items, but they remain hidden in our home because we fear they'll be confiscated to cover debts." Gareth observed the photographs attentively. Even for someone outside the world of quilting, it was evident these were masterpieces. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. The old man's eyes, identical to Eleanor's, bored into him with intensity. "Because I want you to understand that my daughter didn't marry you out of desperation. We could have sold just one of these pieces and saved the studio. She suggested it, but I refused. They're our legacy, our history. Then why accept this marriage?" Jeremiah smiled with melancholy. "Eleanor is like these pieces, unique, valuable, with a beauty that transcends the superficial. Since childhood, she's had an extraordinary capacity to see beyond the evident. She investigated you for months before our first meeting. She said you were different from other businessmen, that beneath your cold exterior there was something authentic. She asked me to trust her, and I did. The revelation hit Gareth like an unexpected wave. It wasn't coincidence that Eleanor had appeared in his life. She had specifically chosen him, orchestrated every step with precision, not just for money, but for something deeper that he still didn't understand. When Jeremiah departed, Gareth remained motionless in his executive chair, contemplating the New York horizon. For the first time, he felt that someone had really seen him, beyond his fortune and power. It was a disturbing and strangely liberating sensation. That night, as they dined in silence in the elegant dining room of the penthouse, Gareth observed Eleanor with new eyes. She, sensing his gaze, raised her eyes from her plate. "Is something wrong?" she asked with that southern accent that had become inexplicably comforting. Gareth hesitated before responding. "Your father came to see me today." Eleanor's expression instantly transformed. A shadow crossed her face, and her hands, always serene, trembled slightly around her wineglass. "What did he tell you?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "He told me about 5 very special quilt pieces," he answered, studying every change in her expression. "And it made me wonder who you really are, Eleanor Beaumont." The argument erupted like a summer thunderstorm, sudden, violent, and charged with electricity. Eleanor rose so abruptly that her wineglass spilled onto the immaculate tablecloth, creating a crimson stain that expanded like a silent accusation between them. "Who am I?" Her voice trembled, not from fear but indignation. "I'm the woman who signed a contract with you, who left Georgia and her family to live in this golden cage, who endures your military schedules and your glacial silences." Gareth also stood, his imposing figure projecting an elongated shadow over the table. "You're the woman who investigated me for months, who planned every casual encounter, who presented a family business on the verge of bankruptcy when in reality you had a hidden heritage that could save it." Eleanor's eyes widened with surprise. "My father told you about the antique pieces." Her voice was barely audible. "Yes, and it made me question what else you've hidden from me," he responded coldly. "Was it all calculated, Eleanor? Every smile, every look, even our wedding night." The face of the young Southern woman transformed, passing from surprise to anger in an instant. With a brusque gesture, she tore off the pearl necklace he had given her at their wedding and threw it on the table. "You're exactly as everyone said," she exclaimed with eyes full of furious tears. "The Glacier of New York, incapable of seeing beyond balance sheets and contracts. You want to know the truth? Yes, I investigated you. Yes, I planned our meetings. And yes, I set out to win you over." Gareth involuntarily stepped back from the intensity of her gaze. "But not for the reasons you think," she continued, her southern accent accentuating with emotion. "Those pieces are the soul of our family, the only thing that connects us to our ancestors. My father would rather starve than sell them. What he didn't tell you is that I tried to convince him for months to sell them, to save the studio and the artisans who depend on us." She approached until only a few inches separated them. "I chose you, among all the rich men in America, because you were the only one who hadn't built your fortune by destroying others. Because behind every acquisition of your company, there was a plan to preserve the essence of each business you bought. Because I thought you would understand the value of tradition, of history." The confession left Gareth speechless. Never before had anyone seen this facet of his business philosophy, carefully hidden beneath layers of pragmatism and relentless efficiency. "How could you know that?" he asked, genuinely confused. "That information isn't public." A sad smile formed on Eleanor's lips. "Because I didn't just investigate your finances. I spoke with employees of companies you acquired, with artisans who thought they would lose their jobs when you bought that glass factory in Vermont, with families who feared losing generational businesses when you acquired the publishing house in Boston. They all told me the same thing, that beneath your cold appearance and relentless methods, there was an unusual respect for well-crafted work and authentic tradition." She moved away from him and walked to the panoramic window that offered a view of illuminated New York. The city seemed a reflection of the conflict that separated them, bright lights and deep shadows, modernity and tradition coexisting in constant tension. "What I didn't plan," she continued with a broken voice, Was falling in love with you. That wasn't in the contract, was it? That clause we didn't contemplate. The confession fell between them like lightning, briefly illuminating an unknown territory that neither had dared to name. "Eleanor," Gareth began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "I don't want your pity. Tomorrow I'll return to Georgia. You can keep the studio, everything. I'll take my dignity, which is the only thing truly mine." She headed for the door with straight back and head held high, with that southern pride that centuries of hardship hadn't managed to bend. But before leaving, she stopped, and without turning, added, "The saddest thing is that you were beginning to thaw, Gareth Prescott. Beneath your New York ice, there's a man capable of feeling. Pity you're so afraid to discover him." The door closed behind her with a soft click that resonated in the apartment's silence like a gunshot. Gareth remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the point where Eleanor had been seconds before, feeling something inside him cracking like an iceberg when the inevitable thaw begins. The next morning dawned grey over New York, as if the city itself reflected Gareth's mood. Seated in his private office in the penthouse, he contemplated Eleanor's suitcase by the main door, prepared for her imminent departure. He hadn't slept all night. His wife's words resonated in his mind like a relentless echo. "The saddest thing is that you were beginning to thaw." Was it true? Was he allowing that woman from the South, with her overflowing passion and different way of understanding life, to penetrate the defenses he had meticulously built over years? The phone's ring interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Prescott, Miss Harrington requests to see you," announced his assistant with a tense voice. Gareth frowned. Vivian Harrington, his ex-fiancée, heiress to one of the oldest families in New York. The woman he had almost married 2 years ago, before discovering she maintained a parallel relationship with an influential politician. The betrayal that had finished freezing his heart. "Tell her I'm busy," he responded dryly. "She insists it's urgent, sir. She says she has important information about your wife." A chill ran down Gareth's spine. After a few seconds of doubt, he agreed. "Show her in." Vivian entered as she always did, with the studied elegance of New York aristocracy and that smile that never reached her eyes. She wore an impeccable tailored suit and discreet but extremely expensive jewelry. "Gareth, darling," she greeted, leaning to kiss him on both cheeks. "What a cozy place you've created here with your new wife." The condescending tone didn't go unnoticed by him. "What do you want, Vivian?" he asked directly, without offering her a seat. The woman's smile tensed slightly. "Always so hospitable. I come in peace, I assure you. I simply thought you should know something about your charming southern wife." She extracted an envelope from her purse and placed it on the desk. "My cousin works at an investment bank in Atlanta. When I mentioned your surprising marriage to Miss Beaumont, he remembered something interesting. It seems your wife tried to obtain a significant loan a few months ago, presenting a rather ambitious business plan." Gareth looked at the envelope without touching it. "Yes, to save the family business, I already know." Vivian arched a perfectly delineated eyebrow. "And you also know that in the loan application, she expressly mentioned her intention to use her family connections to expand to New York. That she specifically researched single New York businessmen who might be interested in investing in traditional crafts? That your name appeared underlined in her documents?" Gareth's stomach contracted. It was exactly what Eleanor had confessed the night before, but hearing it from Vivian's lips sounded sordid, calculating. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" he asked, maintaining control of his voice. Vivian took a step closer, her expensive perfume flooding the space between them. "Because I care about you, Gareth. I always have. I made mistakes, I admit, but at least I never pretended to be someone I wasn't." "Your wife, however, my wife was completely honest with me last night," interrupted Gareth, surprising himself with the firmness of his voice. "She explained to me exactly what she did and why." The surprise on Vivian's face was genuine. "She confessed to manipulating you, and you still defend her?" she asked incredulously. "I don't recognize you, Gareth." He remained silent for a few seconds, reflecting. Finally, he took the envelope and returned it to Vivian. "The difference between you two, Vivian, is that Eleanor investigated me because she was looking for someone who would understand and respect her family heritage. You investigated me to calculate exactly how much my fortune was worth before accepting my marriage proposal." The woman's face hardened. "Don't be unfair. I loved you. Gareth looked her directly in the eyes. No, Vivian. You loved the idea of being Mrs. Prescott, of belonging to the exclusive circle of New York's great fortunes. You were never interested in who I really was. At that moment, the office door opened. Eleanor appeared on the threshold, dressed for travel, her hair tied back and the serene gaze of someone who has made a definitive decision. Upon seeing Vivian, she stopped abruptly. "Excuse me," she said with dignity. "I didn't know you were in a meeting." Before Gareth could respond, Vivian turned to her with a venomous smile. "Mrs. Prescott, how timely. I was just telling your husband about your interesting business plan in Atlanta. I must congratulate you on your creativity." Eleanor's eyes, normally warm, turned cold as steel. She looked directly at Vivian without a trace of fear or shame. "Thank you for saving us time, Ms. Harrington," she responded with a calm that contrasted with the fire in her gaze. "My husband already knows my entire story, including the parts I'm not proud of. Can you say the same?" Vivian visibly paled. "I don't know what you're referring to." Eleanor took a step forward, her presence suddenly filling the room despite her modest stature. "I'm referring to the fact that while investigating potential investors for our studio, I discovered many things. Among them that you continue seeing that married politician even after Gareth broke off your engagement, and that your family isn't as solvent as it appears." A tense silence invaded the room. Vivian collected her purse with trembling hands. "I won't stay to listen to slander," she declared, heading for the door. As she passed by Gareth, she added in a low voice, "I pity you. You've traded New York ice for Southern fire, and you'll end up burned." When the door closed behind her, Gareth and Eleanor remained alone, looking at each other in silence like two combatants after an uncertain battle. "So, your suitcase is ready?" he finally asked, indicating the entrance. Eleanor nodded but didn't move. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked directly, without preamble, with that Southern courage that faced storms head-on. The question hung suspended between them, loaded with possibilities. For the first time in his adult life, Gareth Prescott found himself without a strategic plan, without figures to analyze, without pros and cons to weigh coldly. Only the naked truth of his feelings remained. "No," he answered with a simplicity that contradicted the moment's complexity. "I don't want you to go, Eleanor." The storm that battered New York transformed the city into a liquid landscape, where lights blurred and forms lost their solidity. From the car window, Eleanor observed the raindrops sliding down the glass, creating patterns that reminded her of the geometric motifs in southern quilts. Gareth drove in silence, concentrated on the chaotic downtown traffic. He had insisted on personally driving her to the architecture studio, where she had requested a job interview, refusing to let her use public transportation under the torrential rain. The reconciliation after Vivian's visit had been neither instantaneous nor easy. For days they maintained a silent truce, like two neighboring countries that had agreed to peace but still didn't fully trust each other. They shared meals, exchanged necessary words, occupied the same physical space, but maintained a prudent emotional distance. It was Eleanor who finally broke the impasse by announcing she had sent her resume to various architecture and design studios. She didn't want to be maintained, she affirmed with determination. If they were going to try to build something genuine, she needed her professional independence. Gareth observed her from the corner of his eye while they waited for the traffic light to change to green. Eleanor's profile, silhouetted against the grey of the fogged window, showed a serene determination that fascinated him. How could this woman, only a few years younger than him but from such a different world, show such clarity about what she wanted? "Are you nervous?" he asked, breaking the silence. She smiled without taking her eyes from the window. "A little. It's been a while since I've had a job interview, and my southern accent isn't always well received in New York." The sincerity of her response moved Gareth. Eleanor never hid her vulnerabilities, never pretended a strength she didn't feel. She was authentic in a way that he had forgotten how to be. "Your accent is part of who you are," he responded, surprising himself. "And any studio that doesn't value it would be rejecting not only your way of speaking but your way of seeing the world." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. It was the first time Gareth had said something so personal, so close to a compliment. Well, well, the glacier of New York saying something warm. "I must be dreaming," she joked, but her eyes revealed how much those words meant. They arrived at the elegant modernist building that housed the architecture studio. Gareth stopped the car in front of the entrance. "I'll wait," he said, preparing for a long wait. Eleanor shook her head. "It's not necessary. The interview could last hours, and I know you have important meetings today." "I cancelled them," he confessed. The surprise on Eleanor's face was genuine. "You cancelling meetings? The man who has even breathing scheduled?" Gareth shrugged, an unusually casual gesture for him. "I thought this was more important." The words hung suspended between them, loaded with a meaning that went beyond a simple job interview. For the first time, Gareth was prioritizing something personal over his professional obligations. Eleanor looked at him intensely, as if trying to decipher a hidden message in his eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, before opening the door and plunging into the New York rain. Gareth observed her run to the building entrance, her diminutive figure fighting against the storm. Something stirred within him, a forgotten emotion he had kept frozen for years. While waiting, he took out his phone and began investigating something that had been on his mind since the argument with Eleanor. 2 hours later, when she returned to the car with a radiant smile that announced good news before she even spoke, Gareth had made a decision. "They offered me the position," she announced, shaking raindrops from her hair. "They want me to design a line of tiles inspired by the fusion of northern and southern traditions for a rehabilitation project in the historic center." "Congratulations," he responded with a genuine smile. "Would you like to celebrate?" Instead of heading to the penthouse, Gareth drove towards the outskirts of the city, climbing sinuous roads that serpentined through the hills surrounding New York. The rain had subsided, leaving behind clean, transparent air. Finally, he stopped in front of an old colonial estate, a traditional stone construction surrounded by apple orchards that extended as far as the eye could see. "Where are we?" asked Eleanor, confused. Gareth turned off the engine and looked directly at her. "At my true home." They toured the property under a sky that was beginning to clear, revealing patches of blue between departing clouds. "The estate," explained Gareth as they walked among apple trees still wet from the rain, had belonged to his mother's family for generations. It was the only place where he truly felt connected to his roots. "My mother used to bring me here every weekend before—" He stopped abruptly. "Before what?" asked Eleanor softly. Gareth contemplated the horizon, where New York extended in the distance, a city he knew perfectly but had never really felt was his. "Before abandoning my father and me for a French businessman during the economic crisis," he finally completed. "I was 12 years old. We never heard from her again." The confession came without warning, as if the words had been waiting years to be pronounced. Eleanor remained silent, respecting the magnitude of what he had just shared. "After that, my father became obsessed with rebuilding the family fortune that had dwindled during the recession," continued Gareth, the words now flowing like the rain that had fallen over the city. "He taught me that feelings were weaknesses, that business required absolute coldness. A Prescott can't afford the luxury of feeling," he constantly repeated. They stopped in front of an old twisted oak tree that dominated the estate entrance. "This tree is more than 200 years old," commented Gareth, abruptly changing the subject. "It has survived wars, droughts, storms. Sometimes I think it has more life in its branches than I do in my entire body." Eleanor approached the oak and caressed its rough bark with the palm of her hand, a gesture so intimate it seemed an intrusion to observe it. "In Georgia, we say that oak trees are wise because they're not in a hurry," she responded tenderly. "They grow slowly, bear fruit when they're ready, not when we demand it. Perhaps you also needed your time, Gareth," he observed her, amazed by her capacity to understand what he himself had not been able to articulate. The afternoon fell over the orchards, bathing the landscape in a golden light that softened the contours of all things. "I've been investigating your family's studio," he finally confessed. "Not just the finances, but its history, its legacy." Eleanor visibly tensed. "And what have you discovered?" she asked cautiously. "That you were right. There are things that can't be measured in monetary terms. The history of 5 generations creating beauty with their hands is one of them." He extracted an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Eleanor. Inside were legal documents with his company's letterhead. "I've transferred complete ownership of the studio to your name," he explained. "Not as my wife, but as Eleanor Beaumont, legitimate heir to that legacy. I've also established a line of credit to modernize the facilities and hire apprentices. No conditions, no interference from me. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked with a broken voice. Gareth approached and, for the first time since their wedding night, took Eleanor's hands in his. "Because I want to build something real with you. Not based on a contract or financial needs, but on mutual respect. And respect begins with recognizing who we really are." Under that centuries-old oak, with New York extending at their feet and the setting sun tinging the apple orchards gold, Gareth and Eleanor sealed a new pact, this time not with signatures on paper, but with a kiss that tasted of genuine promise. The news of the pregnancy arrived one September morning, while New York prepared for the autumn festival. Eleanor, who had been experiencing morning sickness for days, had finally gone to the doctor. She waited for Gareth to return from an important meeting to share the news. She found him in his penthouse office, reviewing contracts with the absolute concentration that characterized him. Seeing her at the threshold, his expression softened slightly, a subtle change that only she could have noticed. "How is the doctor?" he asked, setting aside the documents. "Is it something serious?" Eleanor advanced to stand before his desk, her hands slightly trembling. "Depends on what you consider serious," she responded with a nervous smile. "I'm pregnant, Gareth. We're going to have a child." The New York businessman's face transformed completely. The mask of professional efficiency disappeared, replaced by an expression of pure amazement that made him seem much younger. "A child?" he repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language he was trying to understand. He slowly rose and circled the desk until he stood before Eleanor. With unusual delicacy, he placed a hand on his wife's still flat belly. "A child," he repeated, this time as an affirmation full of reverence. The joy on his face was so genuine, so complete, that Eleanor felt tears come to her eyes. During the months they had been together, Gareth had gradually begun to open up, showing glimpses of warmth and vulnerability. But she had never seen him like this, completely disarmed by emotion. He kissed her with a tenderness that contrasted with the usual passion of their encounters, as if suddenly she was something infinitely precious and fragile. Then he embraced her, whispering words against her hair, words of love and promises whose emotional meaning was crystalline. However, that same night, as they dined on the terrace under a starry sky, Eleanor noticed a change in his attitude. Gareth seemed distant, worried, his gaze lost on the New York horizon. "What's wrong?" she finally asked, unable to bear the silent tension. He looked at her with an indecipherable expression. "Was it planned?" he asked in a neutral voice. The question hit Eleanor like a slap. She set her utensils on the plate with a clink that seemed to resonate in the sudden silence. "What are you implying exactly?" Her voice was dangerously calm. Gareth held her gaze. "I'm asking if this pregnancy was something you deliberately planned, just like you planned our marriage." The words, pronounced without accusatory inflection, but loaded with implications, unleashed an inner storm in Eleanor. She rose from the table so abruptly that the chair nearly fell backward. "After everything we've lived through these months, after everything we've shared, you still believe I'm capable of manipulating you like this?" Her voice trembled with indignation. "You think I would use an innocent child, our child, as part of some twisted strategy?" Gareth remained seated, his face an inscrutable mask. "I've learned that in business one must always consider all angles," he responded formally, as if they were in a boardroom. Eleanor looked at him with incredulity. "This isn't a business, Gareth. This is our life, our family. And if after everything you continue seeing calculation where there is love, strategy where there is dedication, then you haven't learned anything." She headed to her room with firm steps, back straight and head high despite the tears that began to blur her vision. In less than an hour, she had packed a suitcase with essentials, called her father, and reserved a flight to Savannah for the following morning. When she left the room with suitcase in hand, she found Gareth exactly where she had left him, seated at the terrace table like a statue, contemplating the city that extended at his feet. "I'm going home," announced Eleanor. "Not to your home in New York, but to my home in Georgia. When you decide if you want to be a father or a businessman to our child, you can look for me. Until then, I prefer to be with people who trust me." Gareth finally looked at her, and for an instant Eleanor glimpsed something in his eyes that could have been regret or fear. But the moment passed, and his expression returned to that of the relentless businessman she had met at the beginning. "The car will be ready to take you to the airport at 8, he said simply. It was the last thing they said to each other before Eleanor left the penthouse, leaving behind the echo of a promise that had begun to flower and now seemed to wither under the weight of distrust. The 3 weeks that followed were hell for both, though neither would admit it. Eleanor took refuge in the family studio outside Savannah, quilting alongside her grandmother while the sun set over the Georgian countryside. The manual work calmed her, allowed her to channel her pain and anger into something beautiful, transforming her feelings into delicate geometric patterns that danced across the surface of quilts and tapestries. Gareth, for his part, immersed himself in work with an intensity that alarmed even his closest collaborators. He spent entire days in the office, sleeping just a few hours on the couch in his office, as if the empty penthouse were too painful a reminder of what he had lost. It was an unexpected call that changed the course of events. Vivian, Gareth's ex-fiancée and heiress to an old New York family, appeared unexpectedly in his office, offering to invest in a new real estate project. During the meeting, while discussing figures and projections, Vivian casually commented, "I always knew we wouldn't have worked out, Gareth. I never really loved you, just the lifestyle you represented. And frankly, who in their right mind would want to have children with you? You would be a terrible father, so cold and controlling." The words, said with casual cruelty, were like a dagger that pierced the last layers of ice protecting Gareth's heart. He realized with painful clarity what he had done. He had rejected the most precious gift life had offered him out of fear of being vulnerable, of being betrayed again. That same afternoon, he took his private jet headed for Savannah. He landed at sunset, when the setting sun bathed the historic district in a reddish light that seemed to ignite it from within. He took a taxi to the rural area outside the city where the Beaumont family's quilting studio was located. He found it easily, a whitewashed building with a modest blue door and a small sign announcing Beaumont Quilts, since 1842. The interior was cool and smelled of cotton and threads. Eleanor was seated on a low stool, meticulously quilting a piece with intricate geometric patterns in cream and indigo. She didn't see him enter, so concentrated was she on her work. Gareth observed her in silence, amazed by the peace her face radiated as she worked, by the delicacy with which her hands gave life to designs that seemed to tell stories without words. Finally, he cleared his throat. Eleanor looked up, seeing him. Her eyes widened with surprise, but her expression remained serene, almost resigned. "You came," she said simply. Gareth nodded, suddenly unable to find the right words. He, who negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking, found himself mute before this woman who held quilting needles in her hands and waited with infinite patience. Finally, he did something he had never done before. He knelt before her right there, in the middle of the dusty studio filled with half-finished quilt pieces and ancient frames that had woven dreams for generations. "Forgive me," he said in perfect English, without a trace of New York accent, "for doubting you, for not trusting you, for not being able to see the gift you were offering me." He took her hands, stained with fabric dust, in his. "I promise that I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that I trust you, that I believe in us, that this child is the most valuable thing I could ever receive." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They shone with a light that reflected the setting sun entering through the studio windows. "I was waiting for you," she confessed in a soft voice. "I knew you would come when you were ready." Outside, Savannah began to light up, as night fell over the millennial city that had seen so many impossible love stories between North and South, between different cultures that, like them, had found a way to intertwine without losing themselves. The return to New York marked the beginning of a new stage. Gareth and Eleanor returned to the penthouse, with the determination to build a genuine home, a space that reflected the fusion of their worlds. The cold, minimalist furniture began to coexist with southern artisanal pieces. The immaculate whites were splashed with color explosions that recalled the Georgia dogwoods in bloom. The pregnancy progressed normally. Eleanor divided her time between her work at the architecture studio, where her fusion tile project had received unanimous praise, and supervising the renovation of the family studio in Georgia, now converted into a training center for young artisans. Gareth, for his part, had begun to delegate more responsibilities to his executive team, limiting his workdays to be present at every medical consultation, every significant moment of the pregnancy. For the first time in his adult life, he was learning to prioritize something above his business empire. But life rarely offers prolonged periods of calm. The storm arrived in the form of a financial crisis that no one had foreseen. An ambitious renewable energy project in which Gareth had invested a large part of the company's resources began to show signs of instability. The news reached him one afternoon while he was preparing the baby's room with Eleanor, painting the walls a soft sand color that recalled the southern beaches. "Gareth, you should see this," said Eleanor, pointing to the news on her tablet. An important technology partner from China announced its withdrawal from the project, citing irreconcilable differences in strategic vision. The news, apparently minor for the general public, was catastrophic for the project's financial structure. Gareth's face darkened. Without a word, he left the paint roller and shut himself in his office. He spent the entire night on the phone, trying to contain the damage, seeking alternative investors, elaborating contingency strategies. When he emerged the following morning, his face was haggard from lack of sleep, but his eyes shone with the iron determination that had led him to build his empire. "How bad is it?" asked Eleanor, serving him a cup of coffee. Gareth looked at her gravely. "Bad. The shares are plummeting. If I don't find a quick solution, we could lose not only the project, but a large part of the company." Eleanor nodded, processing the information without visible alarm. "Tell me exactly what's happening," she requested calmly. "Don't give me the simplified version. I want to understand all the details." For the next hour, Gareth explained the project's complex structure, an innovative technology for solar energy storage that he had developed with a team of American engineers, and that required advanced components manufactured in China. Without these components, the technology was unviable in the short term. Developing alternatives would take years and millions of dollars they didn't have. Eleanor listened attentively, asking occasional questions that surprised Gareth with their technical precision. When he finished explaining, she remained silent for a few minutes, reflecting. "I need to go to Georgia," she said finally. Gareth blinked, confused by the apparent change of subject. "Georgia? Now? We're in the middle of a crisis, Eleanor." She looked at him with an intensity that disconcerted him. "Precisely because of that. I think I have an idea, but I need to talk to my grandfather and see something in the studio." "Your grandfather, the quilter?" Gareth was completely lost. "My grandfather, the retired chemical engineer who dedicates himself to quilting as a passion," corrected Eleanor with a small smile. "Did you believe a family dedicated to crafts for 5 generations only knew about thread and needles?" That same afternoon they flew to Savannah. Eleanor's grandfather, Nathaniel Beaumont, turned out to be a 70-year-old man with penetrating eyes and strong hands that showed decades of work in both laboratories and quilting frames. He had worked for 40 years at the Georgia Institute of Technology, researching new materials and their application in industrial processes. After a long technical conversation with Gareth about the problematic components, Nathaniel took them to a small shed behind the main studio. There, among outdated but functional equipment, he showed them a series of experiments he had been conducting for years. Special conductive materials based on traditional Southern techniques, but applying modern chemical principles. "Southern artisans developed technologies that were later lost," explained the old man passionately. "For years I've tried to recover that knowledge, combining it with modern science. These materials contain a modified natural conductive solution that could serve as an alternative to the components you need." Gareth looked at the prototypes skeptically. How could artisanal materials solve an advanced technological crisis? But 2 weeks later, after intense work sessions with Gareth's team of engineers, the preliminary tests confirmed the unthinkable. The materials developed by Nathaniel Beaumont in his modest Georgian laboratory could replace the Chinese components, with some modifications. The solution was not only technically viable, but opened a new avenue of innovation, the fusion of millennial artisanal techniques with cutting-edge technology. The project was not only saved, but transformed into something more revolutionary, a truly American technology, rooted in historical traditions, but projected towards the future. The presentation to investors at the Metropolitan Club was masterful. Eleanor, 6 months pregnant and radiant in a dress that combined New York elegance with Southern vibrancy, explained the philosophy behind the renovated project, how true innovation consisted of looking simultaneously at the past and the future, how techniques that had survived centuries deserved not only to be preserved but elevated with the tools of the present. The investors were fascinated. What had begun as a crisis converted into a triumph that attracted international attention. Gareth's company not only recovered its stock value, but positioned itself as a pioneer in a new field, sustainable technology based on traditional knowledge. That night, while they celebrated at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Soho, an elderly woman approached their table. She observed Eleanor with curiosity and commented that she looked familiar. "We've met before, haven't we?" she asked in a soft voice. Eleanor looked at her without recognition. "I'm not sure. Of course you were very small," continued the woman. "I worked as a nurse with emergency services years ago. I remember you from an accident on the highway between Savannah and Charleston. You were trapped alongside your unconscious mother, and a young New York businessman stopped to help. He stayed with you, calming you so you would understand better, promising everything would be all right." Eleanor's face paled as fragments of long-repressed memory emerged to the surface. She was 8 years old when that accident occurred during a family trip. She vaguely remembered a young man holding her hand, telling her stories about Southern heroes to distract her from the pain and fear. When the woman moved away, Eleanor looked at Gareth with an indecipherable expression. 13 years ago, did you stop your car to help a Southern girl in a road accident?" she asked with a trembling voice. It was Gareth's turn to pale. He nodded slowly, the memories returning like waves to the shore. "I was returning from a meeting in Savannah," he confirmed. "I saw the accident and stopped. There was a terrified girl with a Southern accent. She reminded me of myself as a child, lost and alone. I stayed with her until the ambulances arrived, told her stories about Southern legends to distract her. They looked at each other in silence, assimilating the impossible coincidence that seemed too perfect to be chance. Fate had united them long before that marriage contract, long before any plan or strategy. "I never forgot your voice," Eleanor finally confessed, with tears in her eyes. "For years, I kept the memory of that kind stranger as a talisman. When I began investigating New York businessmen, something about you seemed familiar, though I didn't know why." Gareth took her hands across the table, overwhelmed by the revelation. "Perhaps it was never coincidence," he said, with a husky voice. "Perhaps we were destined to meet again." At that moment, as New York shone under a starry sky, both felt they had completed a circle begun years ago. What fate had united on a lonely road, no distrust or fear could separate now. The New York spring brought with it the birth of their daughter. She arrived in the world on an April dawn, when the cherry trees were in bloom and the air smelled of promise. They named her Thea, a name that worked in both North and South, a small symbol of the union of their worlds. Gareth held the baby with trembling hands, amazed at the perfection of this small being who carried his blood and Eleanor's. It was a tangible miracle, a living proof that ice could melt and transform into something new and vital. The first months passed in a nebula of sleepless nights, bottles, diapers, and constant wonder at every small change in Thea. Eleanor adapted to the role of mother with the naturalness that characterized everything she did. Gareth, in contrast, constantly felt out of his element, fearful of his own clumsiness in front of something so fragile and precious. One summer afternoon, while Thea slept peacefully in her crib, Gareth found Eleanor on the penthouse terrace, contemplating New York with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, embracing her from behind. She leaned back against his chest with a sigh. "About how different everything is from what I imagined, about how perfect our plan is now, with Thea here and the business flourishing." Gareth nodded, understanding the sentiment. The renewable technology project fused with traditional techniques had been a resounding success. The company's shares reached historic highs, and collaboration requests arrived from around the world. "Sometimes it scares me," confessed Eleanor, turning to look at him. "So much happiness, so much perfection, as if we were tempting fate." Gareth smiled, kissing her forehead. "Always so Southern, with your superstitions." "It's not superstition," she responded seriously. "It's the experience of centuries. My grandmother always says that life seeks balance. Moments of intense light often come, followed by shadows." The words proved uncannily prophetic. That same night, while they were dining, Gareth began to feel a strange discomfort. Palpitations, cold sweat, a pressure in his chest that cut his breathing. He tried to disguise it, but when the fork fell from his trembling hand, Eleanor immediately knew something was wrong. "Gareth?" she asked, alarmed. "What's happening?" He shook his head, unable to speak. Panic grew within him, a sensation of irrational terror he had never experienced. He was convinced he was going to die right there, in his perfect dining room, in front of the woman he loved. Eleanor called emergency services. At the hospital, the diagnosis was conclusive: severe panic attack provoked by extreme exhaustion and chronic anxiety. It wasn't the first time, the doctor confessed to them. Gareth had been hiding a series of similar episodes for months, minimizing them as simple passing stress. Back at the penthouse, when Thea was asleep and the city had submerged into the silence of dawn, Eleanor confronted her husband. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" she asked with a broken voice. "Why face this alone?" Gareth, seated on the edge of the bed with hunched shoulders, suddenly seemed vulnerable, stripped of the armor of confidence that always protected him. "I didn't want to worry you with the pregnancy. Then with the baby," he began, but stopped, recognizing the falsity of his excuse. "The truth is, I don't know how to be weak, Eleanor. I don't know how to ask for help. I never have." The confession, so simple and so devastating, broke something inside Eleanor. She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "Listen to me well," she said firmly. "Strength doesn't consist of never falling, but of always rising. My grandfather says that centuries-old oaks survive because they know how to bend with the wind, not because they try to remain rigid." That night, for the first time, Gareth cried openly in front of another person. He cried for the boy he had been, for the adolescent who tried too hard to be perfect, for the man who had sacrificed his humanity on the altar of success. Eleanor held him in silence, offering him a safe refuge for his vulnerability. The following morning, the doctors were clear. Gareth needed to disconnect completely. His body and mind were at the limit after decades of incessant work. The official diagnosis was severe burnout with episodes of acute anxiety. Without a radical change, the next episode could be much worse. At least 6 months of absolute rest were required. No meetings, no calls, no business decisions. Intensive therapy, moderate exercise, reconnection with forgotten, pleasurable activities. In summary, learning to live again, not just to function. For a man who had built his entire identity around work and success, the diagnosis was devastating. It equated to asking him to stop being who he was, to abandon the only area of his life where he felt completely competent and secure. "I can't do it," he said that afternoon while they discussed the recovery plan. "The company needs me. There are ongoing projects, decisions that only I can make." Eleanor observed him with a mixture of understanding and determination. "And what does Thea need?" she asked softly. "What do I need?" "A father and husband who is present, not a memory or a photograph on the nightstand." Gareth averted his gaze, unable to respond. "If you can't do it for yourself, do it for us," continued Eleanor. 6 months is a small price for the rest of our lives together." Finally, after days of internal negotiation, Gareth agreed. He announced a temporary leave for health reasons, delegating daily management to his closest executive team. The news shook the financial markets. Shares fell in the face of uncertainty. Competitors began to move like sharks smelling blood. It was then that Eleanor took a step forward that surprised everyone. With Thea in her arms, she offered an improvised press conference in the corporate building lobby. With the security that came from her southern origin, where women had always been pillars in times of crisis, she announced that she herself would supervise the main projects during her husband's absence. "The strength of Prescott innovation has never resided in a single person," she declared with a firm voice, "but in a vision that transcends individuals, a philosophy of respect for tradition while embracing the future. That philosophy remains intact." Economic analysts were skeptical. What could a young Southern woman, trophy wife of the businessman, contribute to the complex world of technology and finance? The answer came in the following weeks, when Eleanor demonstrated a profound knowledge of each project, an innate capacity to connect people and concepts, and a leadership style that combined New York efficiency with Southern warmth. Meanwhile, Gareth began the difficult path to recovery. The first weeks were a hell of anxiety, insomnia, and existential crises. Without work as an anchor, he felt adrift, without purpose or identity. The intensive therapy sessions unearthed old traumas, maternal abandonment, paternal pressure, the loneliness of a privileged but emotionally arid childhood. It was Eleanor who suggested they spend time at the family estate, away from New York's frenetic rhythm. There, among ancient apple orchards and century-old oaks, Gareth slowly began to reconnect with long-forgotten parts of himself. He rediscovered the pleasure of walking without a fixed destination, of reading for pure enjoyment, of observing a sunset without thinking about schedules or commitments. One afternoon, while Thea crawled across the estate's stone floor, Eleanor arrived with an unexpected proposal. Why not learn quilting? Manual work, she explained, could be therapeutic. The concentration necessary to create quilts functioned as a form of active meditation, anchoring the mind in the present moment. Gareth agreed with skepticism. His hands, accustomed to signing contracts and managing electronic devices, seemed clumsy and useless in front of the quilting frame. His first attempts were disastrous, deformed, uneven pieces that collapsed before being finished. In another time, failure would have enraged him, leading him to abandon any activity where he didn't immediately excel. But now, guided by Eleanor and her infinite patience, he learned to enjoy the process, to value gradual learning, to find beauty even in imperfection. Little by little, week by week, his hands acquired muscle memory, his eyes learned to see the hidden possibilities in each pattern. And with each piece that emerged from the frame, something new also emerged within him, a capacity to be present, to accept his limitations, to connect with something deeper and more ancestral than success, measured in figures and graphs. One night, while they dined under the stars in the estate courtyard, Eleanor showed him photographs of the New York office, her team celebrating the signing of a new international contract, advances in projects he had initiated, but that now flourished under new hands. "They don't need me," said Gareth, surprised to discover that the realization didn't hurt as he had expected. "The company functions perfectly without me." Eleanor smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "It's the greatest success of a leader, building something that can exist beyond him. But you're wrong about one thing. They do need you, just not in the way you always believed." That night, as he observed Eleanor sleep next to Thea, Gareth understood with crystal clarity that the true crisis hadn't been the panic attack or the medical diagnosis. The true crisis had been his inability to see that strength could take many forms, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that sometimes surrendering was the bravest act of all. The return to New York, after 5 months of retreat at the estate, marked the beginning of another stage. The penthouse, which had once seemed the epitome of modern perfection, now felt strangely alien to Gareth. Too cold, too calculated, like a suit that no longer fit. "We could redecorate," suggested Eleanor one afternoon, while observing her husband contemplating with a distant expression the panoramic view of the city. "Make this place truly ours, not just your space to which I adapted." The proposal ignited a spark in Gareth's eyes. Over the following weeks, they worked together, transforming the penthouse. Walls that previously exhibited minimalist art now showed an eclectic mixture of northern and southern pieces. The formal dining room gave way to a more welcoming space, with a large reclaimed wood table. The sterile office converted into a shared studio where Eleanor could design and Gareth could continue with his quilting therapy. The transformation of the physical space reflected the internal transformation Gareth was experiencing. Under the patient guidance of his therapist, he had begun to identify and question the limiting beliefs that had governed his life. That personal value was measured solely by professional success, that showing vulnerability equated to showing weakness, that absolute control was the only way to avoid abandonment and pain. However, while Gareth advanced in his personal process, a subtle distance began to grow between him and Eleanor. It wasn't hostility or disinterest, but something more complex, a silence charged with unspoken words, unformulated questions, unconfessed fears. The nights became especially revealing. They shared the bed as always, but rarely touched beyond a goodnight kiss. Each seemed to inhabit a parallel world, separated by mere physical inches, but emotional miles. One night, while New York slept under a gentle autumn rain, Gareth finally broke the silence. "Are you happy, Eleanor?" he asked in the darkness, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain against the windows. The silence that followed his question extended so long that Gareth thought she was asleep. When she finally responded, her voice sounded distant, as if coming from a deep place within her. "I don't know," she answered with brutal honesty. "I love you. I love our daughter. I love the life we're building. But sometimes I wonder if you really see me, if you know the woman I've become while you were busy healing." The confession hit Gareth like an unexpected wave. He sat up, turning on the bedside lamp to see his wife's face. Eleanor lay on her back, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, but her gaze seemed to look through it to a much more distant point. "What do you mean?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Of course I see you. You're my wife, Thea's mother, my savior when I needed you most." Eleanor turned towards him, her eyes bright in the dim light. "That's the problem, Gareth. You see me as your wife, as Thea's mother, as your savior. Roles I play in your life. But do you see me? The Eleanor who has been directing your company these months, making decisions she never imagined, facing challenges that terrified her." She sat up in bed, hugging her knees as she used to do when nervous. "During these months, while you found inner peace making quilts and reconnecting with your essence, I faced financial sharks who expected me to fail, partners who didn't take me seriously, a board of directors that barely hid its skepticism. And I did it all without complaining, without showing you how terrified I was many days, because I didn't want to add more weight to your recovery." The revelation left Gareth speechless. He had been so concentrated on his own process, so focused on his personal healing, that he hadn't really seen what was happening with Eleanor. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. She smiled sadly. "Because I love you. Because you needed that space to heal. Because Southern women learn from a young age to be strong for others, to keep our own fears to ourselves so as not to worry those we love." She rose and walked to the panoramic window, observing the rain-soaked city shining below. "I've changed, Gareth. The woman you met, who meticulously planned to win you over to save the family business, no longer exists. In her place is someone who discovered she can direct a multinational, who can face powerful men and make herself respected, who can make million-dollar decisions without blinking." She turned to look at him directly. "And I'm afraid this new me isn't what you need. That while you were becoming softer, more connected to your emotions, I was becoming harder, more pragmatic. That our paths, which miraculously met, are now diverging again." Gareth stood and approached her but didn't touch her. For the first time, he didn't know how to bridge the distance he felt between them. "I think I always knew you were capable of all that," he said finally, "even before you discovered it yourself. I saw it in your eyes the day we signed that contract, when you pretended to be a shy girl, but your gaze revealed a determination that fascinated and terrified me in equal parts." He took a breath, searching for the right words. "If I haven't given you the space to share your fears and triumphs, it's been due to my own insecurity. I was afraid to discover that you no longer needed me, that you had grown beyond me. That the broken man I am now wasn't up to the extraordinary woman you've become." Eleanor looked at him with surprise, as if she found it hard to believe what she was hearing. "You, insecure, the great Gareth Prescott." He smiled with melancholy. The old Gareth Prescott was a fortress built on quicksand. His security was an illusion sustained by external success and obsessive control. The man I am now is learning to build from real foundations, but the process is slow and painful. And sometimes I wonder if I deserve a woman like you, if I have anything valuable to offer you." Eleanor took a step toward him, shortening the physical distance between them. "And it hasn't occurred to you that perhaps it's precisely this new Gareth that I need, that perhaps I've become stronger in some areas, because unconsciously I knew you were finding your own strength in others. That perhaps we aren't diverging but complementing each other in a new way." The words resonated in the silent room, opening a possibility that neither had considered, that their individual transformations weren't separating them, but reconfiguring their dynamic, creating a distinct but potentially deeper and more authentic balance. That night they made love for the first time in months, rediscovering each other not as the characters they had played in their shared history, the devoted wife, the protective husband, but as the complex and multidimensional people they had become. It wasn't the passionate encounter of their early days, nor the comfortable routine they had developed later. It was something new, a dance between two beings who were getting to know each other again, with newly healed scars and newly discovered strengths. Afterward, as they lay entwined listening to the rain that was beginning to subside, Gareth had a revelation. "I want us to continue directing the company together when I return," he said, caressing Eleanor's hair. "Not like before with me making all the decisions and you supporting me from the shadows, but as true partners, each contributing their unique strengths." Eleanor raised her head to look at him, surprise evident in her eyes. "Are you serious? The great Gareth Prescott sharing control of his empire?" He smiled, recognizing the irony. "It turns out my empire survived perfectly well without me, thanks to a stubborn southerner who turned out to be a better strategist than I ever was. It would be stupid not to take advantage of that talent, don't you think?" Eleanor laughed, a crystalline sound that Gareth had missed without realizing. "You've always been many things, Gareth Prescott, but never stupid," she responded, kissing him softly. Outside, the rain had completely ceased. New York began to awaken under a sky that gradually cleared, promising a new day. In the adjoining room, Thea moved in her crib, emitting the soft sounds that announced her imminent awakening. Life continued its course, with its challenges and its gifts. But for the first time in a long time, the silence between them was no longer charged with unspoken words, but with possibilities yet to discover. Gareth's first official day back at the company was etched in the memory of all employees as the day when the Glacier of New York arrived in jeans and a casual shirt, with a relaxed smile that no one had ever seen in the corporate environment. At his side, Eleanor projected a serene confidence, dressed in an elegant suit, but with distinctive touches of color that reflected her Southern heritage. The meeting with the executive team began with a declaration that left everyone astonished. "From today, Eleanor and I will direct this company as co-CEOs," announced Gareth naturally. "Each strategic decision will be made jointly, taking advantage of our complementary perspectives." The silence that followed his words was revealing. Some executives exchanged skeptical glances. Others, mainly those who had worked closely with Eleanor during Gareth's absence, nodded with approval. "I understand your doubts," continued Gareth. "The old Gareth Prescott would never have shared power, but the man you see today has learned that true strength resides in recognizing others' capabilities, not in trying to control everything personally." During the following weeks, the dynamic began to take shape. Gareth contributed his experience, his profound knowledge of the market, and his long-term strategic vision. Eleanor complemented with her creativity, her capacity to connect seemingly disparate concepts, and her natural talent for building authentic relationships with partners and clients. What could have been a failed experiment converted into an innovative leadership model that began to attract media attention. The New Prescott, When North and South Meet, titled an important economic newspaper, highlighting how the fusion of pragmatic Northern mentality and Southern creativity was revolutionizing the way business was done in America. Professional success reflected in a renewed personal harmony. Eleanor and Gareth had found a rhythm that respected both their individual needs and their connection as a couple. Mornings began early, with a family breakfast before Mrs. Wilson, a retired widow from Brooklyn who had become a trusted nanny, arrived to care for Thea. 3 days a week they worked together at the office. The other 2 they alternated so one could spend quality time with their daughter. Evenings were religiously reserved for them, a sacred time when business wasn't discussed. Sometimes they strolled through Central Park, discovering hidden small restaurants. Other times they stayed in the transformed penthouse, cooking together dishes that fused Northern and Southern recipes while Thea played at their feet. One spring afternoon, while enjoying a rare moment of tranquility in the botanical garden, Eleanor shared an idea she had been gestating for months. What if we expand the concept of the family studio, not just as a center for artisanal production, but as a therapeutic space? Gareth looked at her with curiosity, encouraging her to continue. "During your recovery, we saw how quilting work helped you reconnect with yourself. Find calm amid chaos," she explained, her enthusiasm growing with each word. "There are thousands of people facing the same exhaustion you suffered, especially in the corporate world." The idea was audacious. Transform part of the family studio in Georgia into a center where executives on the verge of burnout, people with chronic anxiety, or simply individuals seeking reconnection could learn traditional artisanal techniques as a form of occupational therapy. "We would combine the best of both worlds," continued Eleanor. The ancestral knowledge of Southern quilting, with the latest research on neuroplasticity and chronic stress recovery. We would preserve the family tradition while making it relevant for the challenges of the 21st century. Gareth listened, fascinated not only by the idea but by the transformation he observed in his wife. The young woman he had met, with her meticulous plans but limited to saving the family business, had become a visionary, capable of connecting seemingly disparate worlds to create something completely new. "It's brilliant," he responded finally. "We could partner with psychologists specialized in work stress, create tailored programs for different needs, offer intensive retreats, or regular sessions for local residents." The shared enthusiasm quickly crystallized into action. In less than 6 months, Hands and Soul Therapeutic Crafts Center opened its doors in a carefully restored historic building in rural Georgia. The concept proved to be exactly what many needed in an era of digital hyperconnection and emotional disconnection. Exhausted executives, blocked artists, people dealing with traumas or losses found in the center a space where time seemed to slow down, where hands learned to create tangible beauty, and in the process, the spirit found an anchor in the present. Each piece created, imperfect, unique, authentic, became a testimony of healing. The success was immediate and profound. What had begun as a parallel project soon generated a waiting list and international attention. Mental health publications, business magazines, and even cultural journals highlighted the innovative fusion of artisanal tradition and psychological well-being. One autumn afternoon, while supervising a session for executives of a technological multinational, Eleanor and Gareth observed with satisfaction how men and women habitually attached to digital devices rediscovered the simple pleasure of quilting with their own hands. "You know what's most ironic?" commented Gareth in a low voice. "I spent years building high-technology companies, seeking the next disruptive innovation, and it turns out our greatest success is based on a technique that has been practiced for millennia." Eleanor smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "Perhaps true innovation doesn't consist of inventing something completely new, but of rediscovering ancient wisdom with modern eyes," she responded. "In building bridges between who we were and who we are, between tradition and future." It was a philosophy they had incorporated not only into their professional projects, but into their family life. Thea, who was already taking her first faltering steps, grew between two worlds. She learned words in northern and southern dialects, enjoyed both the structure and precision that Gareth taught her and the spontaneity and expressiveness that Eleanor fostered. One Sunday afternoon, while the family strolled through Fifth Avenue after visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Gareth received an unexpected call. His face visibly paled as he listened, responding with tense monosyllables. "What's wrong?" asked Eleanor when he hung up, immediately recognizing the signs of stress she had learned to identify during his recovery. Gareth breathed deeply before responding. "It was my Aunt Victoria. My father has suffered a heart attack. He's stable, but..." He didn't need to complete the sentence. Despite the distant and complicated relationship he maintained with his father, the news had deeply shaken him. "We need to go to the hospital," said Eleanor firmly, taking Thea in her arms. New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of the most prestigious in the city, imposed with its solemn architecture. In the private room, Montgomery Prescott lay connected to monitors, his normally imposing figure reduced by illness. At 73 years old, the Prescott family patriarch showed for the first time signs of fragility. The encounter was initially tense. Father and son hadn't maintained a meaningful conversation in years, limiting themselves to brief exchanges during occasional family gatherings. The relationship had especially deteriorated since Gareth decided to take his leave for health reasons, a decision that Montgomery had qualified as unforgivable weakness. However, faced with his own mortality, Montgomery seemed different, more vulnerable, more reflective. When he saw Thea, his only grandchild, something changed in his expression. The little one, far from being frightened by the tubes and monitors, gave him a toothless smile that seemed to melt decades of emotional rigidity. "She looks like you when you were small," commented Montgomery with a weak voice, the same curiosity in her eyes. The comment, so simple but so revealing of a connection that Gareth believed lost forever, broke something within him. For the first time in his adult life, he allowed his father to see his vulnerability, his fears, his complete humanity. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Montgomery spoke of his own regrets, of how his wife's abandonment had transformed him into a man incapable of showing affection, obsessed with instilling strength in his son to spare him the pain he himself had suffered. "I thought I was protecting you," he confessed. "But now I see I was only teaching you to fear like me." Eleanor observed the scene in silence, holding Thea, who had finally fallen asleep, in her arms. She saw in these two men, separated by generations but united by similar wounds, the reflection of a pattern that could be broken, that was being broken at that very moment. When they finally left the hospital, well into the night, Gareth walked more erect, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "For years I blamed my father for teaching me to repress my emotions, to value control over connection," he reflected as they walked to the car. "But I never asked myself who had taught that to him, what wounds he was trying to heal in his imperfect way." Eleanor nodded, understanding the depth of his realization. "Family traditions aren't just recipes and celebrations," she responded. "They're also patterns of behavior, ways of loving and fearing that are silently transmitted from generation to generation." She looked at Thea, sleeping peacefully against her chest. "The beautiful thing is that we can always choose which traditions to continue and which to transform. We can take the best of the North and the South, of the old and the new, to create something that is truly ours." While New York slept under a starry sky, the family returned to their transformed home, a space that was no longer completely northern or southern, but a new emotional geography where both worlds met and mutually enriched. A place where Thea could grow free from the fears that had limited previous generations, nourished by deep roots that extended in two directions. On that night of revelations and new beginnings, Gareth and Eleanor silently sealed a pact. Their personal wounds would not become their daughter's scars. The true legacy they would leave her would not be of cold marble nor unfinished clay, but a new way of being, flexible like wet cotton, strong like woven quilting, authentic like the art that emerges when hands follow the wisdom of the heart. The New York winter arrived with unusual intensity, bringing with it not only low temperatures, but winds of change that no one had anticipated. Montgomery Prescott's recovery was slow but steady, and with it came an unexpected transformation in the family dynamic. The patriarch, faced with his own mortality, had begun a process of introspection that led him to reconsider many of his beliefs and attitudes. One December afternoon, while New York prepared for the holiday festivities, Montgomery requested a formal meeting with Gareth and Eleanor at his residence in the Upper East Side, a colonial mansion that had belonged to the family for generations. "I've been reviewing the will and the structure of our family businesses," he announced without preamble, seated in his leather chair next to the lit fireplace. "And I've decided to make some changes." Gareth and Eleanor exchanged concerned glances. Any restructuring could affect not only them, but hundreds of employees who depended on the stability of the Prescott companies. "I want to unify all our holdings under a new structure," continued Montgomery. "A family foundation that preserves our legacy, but also incorporates new perspectives." He paused, observing Eleanor directly. "Your therapeutic craft center in Georgia has made me reconsider many things, daughter. The idea that tradition can be not only preserved but revitalized, that the old and new can complement each other rather than oppose." Eleanor's surprise was evident. It was the first time Montgomery addressed her as daughter, and that he showed genuine interest in her work. "I want the Prescott-Beaumont Foundation to be the umbrella under which all our companies operate," explained the patriarch, "with a clear mission, preserving Northern excellence while incorporating Southern passion, fusing, not dividing, innovating, not just for economic benefit but for positive impact." Gareth listened in astonishment. This was a completely new language from his father, a man whose philosophy had always been profit maximization above any other consideration. The meeting extended for hours, as Montgomery detailed his vision. A new administrative council where Gareth and Eleanor would have equal participation, corporate social responsibility programs inspired by the Georgia Center model, strategic investments in projects that combined advanced technology with traditional crafts at risk of disappearing. When they finally said goodbye, well into the night, Gareth felt as if he had met his father for the first time. "What just happened?" he asked Eleanor as they returned to the penthouse by car, the city shining with holiday lights under a light snowfall. That man isn't my father. At least, not the father I've known all my life. Eleanor smiled, observing the condensation drops dancing in the darkness. Sometimes we need to face our own fragility to recognize what truly matters, she responded softly. Your father has looked death in the eyes and decided what legacy he really wants to leave. Not just prosperous companies, but a purpose, a philosophy that transcends the material. The implementation of the new structure began immediately after the holiday festivities, generating shockwaves in the New York business world. Many traditional shareholders showed skepticism about the new direction. Some even sold their stakes, considering that the Prescotts had lost their way. But to the critics' surprise, the Prescott-Beaumont Foundation quickly attracted a new generation of investors, young entrepreneurs with social conscience, funds specialized in sustainable businesses, international institutions interested in company models that preserved cultural heritage while embracing innovation. The definitive test came in the form of a global economic crisis. A collapse in Asian markets unleashed a chain reaction that affected companies worldwide. Companies that seemed indestructible began to falter. Multinational conglomerates announced massive layoffs and desperate restructurings. Amid the general panic, the Prescott-Beaumont Foundation maintained a remarkable serenity. Its diversified structure, with investments in both cutting-edge technology and traditional crafts, proved surprisingly resilient. While entire sectors collapsed, their artisanal companies continued producing, adapting, finding new markets in times where the authentic and lasting acquired renewed value. One March morning, while Gareth and Eleanor had breakfast on the penthouse terrace, contemplating a New York that began to awaken from its winter lethargy, they received an unexpected call. The Secretary of Commerce requested their presence in Washington to discuss a special project, the creation of a national program for revitalization of traditional crafts, directly inspired by their model of fusion between tradition and innovation. They want us to design a program for the entire country, explained Gareth, amazed. Workshops that combine ancestral techniques with contemporary applications, training for unemployed youth, research on traditional materials for modern uses. Eleanor observed him with a mixture of pride and amazement. The man before her, enthusiastic about a project that united the best of their worlds, had come a long way from that cold executive she had met years ago. Who would have imagined, she commented, caressing his cheek, the glacier of New York converted into a defender of traditional crafts. Life has fascinating twists. Gareth took her hand, kissing her palm with reverence. It all began with a stubborn Southerner who dared to challenge my certainties, he responded, who taught me that true strength is in flexibility, not rigidity. The national program was just the beginning. In the following months, while the global economy slowly began to recover, the Prescott-Beaumont model attracted international attention. Delegations from various countries visited both the ultra-modern offices in New York and the Artisanal Center in Georgia, studying how to replicate this unique fusion of tradition and future. Thea, who had already turned 2, grew amid this whirlwind of activity, unconsciously absorbing the most important lesson, that apparent opposites, north and south, old and new, reason and passion, could not only coexist but mutually enrich each other. One summer afternoon, while the family enjoyed a rare moment of tranquility at the upstate estate, surrounded by apple orchards resplendent under the setting sun, Eleanor shared news she had been keeping for weeks. "I'm pregnant again," she announced with a radiant smile. "Thea will have a little brother or sister in winter." Gareth, who was watching his daughter play among the ancient apple trees, felt a wave of emotion that left him momentarily speechless. When he finally could speak, his voice was charged with wonder. "Every time I think I can't be happier, life surprises me," he said, embracing Eleanor. "Every time I believe I've reached fulfillment, I discover a new level of gratitude." That night, while Thea slept and the estate submerged in the silence perfumed with lavender and rosemary, Gareth and Eleanor remained in the courtyard, contemplating the stars that shone with supernatural intensity in the upstate New York sky. "You know what's most extraordinary?" reflected Gareth in a low voice, as if fearing to disturb the moment's magic. "It's not the professional success, nor the recognition, not even the family we're building, though all that is marvelous." Eleanor looked at him with curiosity. "What then?" "That I finally understand what it means to be truly present," he responded, intertwining his fingers with hers. "For years I existed in a hypothetical future, chasing goals that always moved away, or in a painful past I tried to compensate for. Never really here, never really now." His eyes found Eleanor's, bright under the moonlight. "You taught me to inhabit the present, to feel the fabric between my fingers, to truly listen when Thea speaks, to savor each instant instead of devouring it hastily on the way to something else." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the depth of the transformation they both had experienced. "My grandmother always said that Southerners understand time differently," she responded. "For us, it's not something that's spent, but something that's savored like a good coffee or a good conversation." She rested her head on Gareth's shoulder, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, where a new life was beginning to form. "Northerners build to last, and that's beautiful," she continued. "But Southerners know that even what doesn't last can be deeply significant. A sunset, a flower that opens, a shared laugh. The ephemeral also has value." Gareth nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. Under that starry sky, in the land where his ancestors had cultivated apples for generations, he felt he had finally found his place in the world. It wasn't New York or Georgia. It wasn't the North or the South, but that intermediate space where opposites met and transcended their limitations. The estate slept around them, ancient and solid like the certainty that now inhabited his heart. That true love doesn't erase differences, but celebrates them, doesn't dilute individual identities, but intertwines them in a complex and beautiful dance that is greater than the sum of its parts. And as the night advanced and the stars traced their immutable course over New York, Gareth and Eleanor remained together, perfectly present in that moment that contained all moments. Their past, with its wounds and discoveries, their future with its promises and possibilities, and above all their shared present, the only place where love could truly exist, breathing between them as real as the perfumed air of the American night. The birth of their second child, Caleb, coincided with one of the most intense storms that New York had experienced in decades. While winds lashed the city and rain fell in dense curtains that blurred the urban landscape, Eleanor gave birth at New York Presbyterian Hospital, surrounded by a calm that radically contrasted with the external chaos. Unlike Thea's birth, where Gareth had been visibly nervous, constantly monitoring vital signs and repeatedly consulting medical staff, this time he remained serene beside his wife, holding her hand, breathing with her, present in every moment of the process. His internal transformation now manifested in moments like this, a newly acquired capacity to inhabit uncertainty without trying to control it. Caleb Prescott Beaumont arrived in the world with a powerful cry that made the midwife smile. "He has southern lungs," commented the woman as she placed the baby on Eleanor's chest, "but the determination is purely northern." The little one, unlike his sister who had been born with the dark hair typical of southern heritage, had a soft blonde down that recalled Gareth's European ancestors. His eyes, however, were dark and deep like Eleanor's, creating a physical combination that perfectly symbolized the fusion of their heritages. The first months with two children proved to be a completely new challenge. Thea, now almost 3, alternated between moments of protective tenderness toward her brother and episodes of intense jealousy that tested her parents' patience. The family dynamic slowly rebalanced, finding new rhythms and routines that accommodated everyone's needs. The Prescott Beaumont Foundation continued prospering, expanding internationally with projects that followed the same fundamental principle, honoring tradition while embracing innovation. The National Program for Revitalization of Traditional Crafts had been successfully implemented in various American regions, generating employment and preserving artisanal techniques in danger of extinction. One spring morning, while having breakfast in the penthouse with views of a New York resplendent under the morning sun, Gareth shared an idea he had been considering for months. "What if we build a real bridge between our worlds?" he proposed, while serving coffee in pottery cups from the Blue Ridge Mountains. "Not just metaphorically, but physically." Eleanor looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean exactly?" "I was thinking of creating an innovation and craft center halfway between New York and Georgia," he explained, his enthusiasm growing with each word. "A space where traditional artisans work alongside technological innovators, where ancient knowledge and modern techniques coexist and mutually enrich. The idea quickly crystallized. They found an old farm in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, geographically halfway between their native cities, with historic buildings that could be renovated, respecting their original architecture, while incorporating cutting-edge sustainable technologies. The project, baptized as the Bridge, became the physical materialization of the philosophy that had transformed their lives and businesses. Traditional artisans from all American regions were invited to establish workshops alongside technological startups. Programmers worked side by side with quilters. Digital designers collaborated with weavers who kept alive century-old techniques. The inauguration, celebrated on a luminous autumn day, attracted international attention. Cultural authorities, business leaders, academics, and artists from various countries gathered to witness the birth of this unique experiment that challenged established dichotomies between tradition and modernity. In his opening speech, Gareth moved away from the podium to stand beside Eleanor, who held Caleb while Thea, dressed in a traditional outfit that combined northern and southern elements, clung to her skirt. "This center is not just a building or a business concept," he began, his voice resonating in the restored central courtyard. "It's a testament that the apparent contradictions of our life can be sources of creativity and renewal when we dare to maintain them in productive tension rather than prematurely resolving them." He paused, looking at his family with evident emotion. "Most of us grew up believing we had to choose tradition or innovation, efficiency or humanity, reason or passion. But life has taught me that true wisdom isn't in choosing, but in integrating, not in simplifying, but in embracing complexity." Eleanor took over, her southern accent adding musicality to her words. "In the mansions of Savannah, water and stone, apparently opposite elements, complement each other to create transcendent beauty. In the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, the organic and the geometric dance together rather than compete. This is how we want this space to be, a constant reminder that our differences, when respected and celebrated, can generate a richer harmony than any uniformity." The center prospered beyond their initial expectations. It became a living laboratory, where revolutionary materials based on millennial artisanal techniques were developed, where unemployed youth learned traditional crafts empowered by digital technology, where rural communities found new ways to preserve their cultural heritage, making it economically viable in the 21st century. One winter afternoon, almost 3 years after the inauguration, Gareth found Eleanor in the center's quilting workshop, working on a particularly intricate piece. Her hands, always elegant but now marked by years of work with fabric, modeled the threads with precise and confident movements. At her side, Thea, now 6 years old, tried to imitate her gestures with moving concentration. "It's beautiful," commented Gareth, observing the design emerging under her fingers. A complex geometric pattern that recalled southern quilts, but incorporated modern elements in a harmonious fusion. Eleanor smiled without raising her eyes from her work. "It's for the center's garden," she explained. "I want to create a mural that tells our story, not with words but with symbols." She indicated the different elements of the design, explaining their meaning. Southern motifs that represented her Georgian roots, modernist patterns that evoked the northern spirit, small figures that symbolized key moments in their shared journey, the initial contract, the transformative wedding night, the birth of their children, the creation of the Bridge. "It's like a map of our path," observed Gareth, moved by the symbolic depth of the work, "from where we started to where we are now." Eleanor finally raised her gaze, her eyes bright with the creative intensity that never failed to captivate her husband. "Not just where we came from, but also where we're going," she gently corrected. "Look here." She pointed to an area of the design where the pattern opened to spaces not yet defined, possibilities waiting to be realized. "Our journey continues," she said with a serene smile. "The design keeps evolving, incorporating new experiences, new challenges, new beauty to discover." Thea, who had been listening attentively, pointed to an empty space in the design. "Can I add something here, Mum?" she asked, with the seriousness that characterized her when it came to art. Eleanor nodded, handing her a quilting tool suitable for her small hands. "Of course, my love. This is our family mural. Each one must leave their mark. With absolute concentration, Thea began to create a small design that combined elements she had seen in both Georgia and New York, intuitively adding her own interpretation. It wasn't technically perfect, but it possessed a moving authenticity. Gareth observed the scene with a sense of fullness that still surprised him by its intensity. His daughter, product of two distinct traditions, wasn't limited by either. Instead of feeling divided, she was developing as a creative synthesis that transcended the apparent contradictions of her heritages. As the winter sun began to set, bathing the workshop in a golden light that softened all contours, Gareth reflected on the path traveled. From that cold contract signed in a New York office to this moment of shared creation in a space that symbolized the fusion of their worlds, the transformation had been deep and complete. He recalled the man he had been, controlling, disconnected from his emotions, fearful of vulnerability, and he contemplated the man he had become, present, connected, capable of embracing uncertainty as an integral part of a full life. "What are you thinking about?" asked Eleanor, perceiving his reflective state. Gareth smiled, taking a piece of fabric and beginning to fold it without conscious plan, simply letting his hands find their own truth. "I was thinking about bridges," he responded, "about how all my life I tried to build walls to protect myself, to maintain control, and how you taught me to build bridges instead. Bridges to you, to our children, to parts of myself I had forgotten or repressed." His hands continued working the fabric as he spoke, creating a form that gradually began to take the appearance of a stylized bridge. "Walls divide and limit," he continued. "Bridges connect and expand. Walls create illusion of security at the cost of isolation. Bridges imply risk but offer infinite possibilities." Eleanor observed his hands, fascinated both by the physical transformation of the fabric and by the spiritual transformation his words revealed. "In Georgia there's an old saying, 'Only those who dare to cross the river can discover the opposite shore,'" she commented, adding a small detail to the bridge Gareth was forming. "I think we both dared to cross when everything indicated we should remain on our safe shores." The piece they were creating together, improvised and simple compared to the elaborate mural Eleanor had been working on, suddenly acquired a special beauty. It wasn't perfect or technically complex, but it captured something essential. Two different shores connected by a bridge that didn't nullify their differences, but celebrated them in their complementarity. Thea approached, studying the creation with critical eyes. "Something's missing," she declared with the direct frankness of children. Taking a small quilting tool, she added 4 tiny figures on the bridge, 2 large and 2 small, a family crossing together. "Now it's complete," she said with satisfaction. Gareth and Eleanor exchanged glances, recognizing the profound truth in their daughter's intuitive gesture. The bridge wasn't just a structure that connected places. It was a shared path, a journey undertaken together. Outside, the sun had finished setting, and the first stars began to appear in the Virginia sky. Inside the illuminated workshop, a family continued creating together, adding new elements to a design that, like their shared history, remained open to future possibilities, to new syntheses, to beauty yet to discover. 10 years after the first encounter in that cold New York office, Gareth contemplated the horizon from the terrace of the family estate. The landscape, with its ordered apple orchards and centuries-old oaks, reflected a harmony that resonated deeply with what he had found in his life. Northern structure and organization intertwined with southern warmth and spontaneity. Behind him, the ancient stone house buzzed with activity. They were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Prescott Beaumont Foundation, an occasion that reunited family, friends, colleagues, and collaborators from both worlds. Time had left its mark on all of them. Montgomery Prescott, now an 83-year-old patriarch, moved with the help of a cane carved by artisans from the bridge, but his mind remained sharp as ever. The reconciliation with his son had triggered a late but profound transformation, converting him into a passionate defender of the integrative philosophy that now defined the family business. Jeremiah and Martha Beaumont, Eleanor's parents, had moved their primary residence to Virginia to be closer to the center and their grandchildren, though they maintained the family home outside Savannah. The Georgian studio, now directed by Eleanor's cousin, had become an international center of excellence for the preservation and renewal of traditional quilting techniques. Thea, having just turned 12, already showed a fascinating personality that combined her father's methodical determination with her mother's creative intuition. Bilingual not just in formal and colloquial English, but also fluent in Spanish, she moved confidently between cultures and contexts, a natural ambassador of the integrative philosophy her parents had built. Caleb, at 9 years old, was the family dreamer. While his sister excelled in scientific and business subjects, he showed exceptional artistic talent and a sensitivity that connected him deeply with the natural world. His room was full of drawings of plants, animals, and landscapes, observed with an attention that surprised in someone so young. And then there was Willow, the unexpected blessing that had arrived in their lives 5 years ago. With her inexhaustible energy and contagious laugh, she was like a whirlwind that kept everyone in constant movement, reminding them of the importance of spontaneity and joy. Eleanor approached silently, encircling Gareth's waist from behind. At 40, her beauty had matured like fine wine, acquiring new dimensions of depth and serenity. The first silver threads among her dark hair only highlighted the fire that continued burning in her eyes. "Remembering the path traveled?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Gareth smiled, covering her hands with his. "I was thinking about that contract we signed 10 years ago, about how what began as a calculated transaction transformed into something neither of us could have imagined." He turned to look at her, marveling as he did every day at the luck he had had in finding her, or rather, in being found by her. "That day, I believed I was acquiring a decorative wife who wouldn't complicate my perfectly ordered life," he continued, caressing her cheek. "Instead, I found a companion who challenged every one of my certainties, who showed me new ways of being, who taught me that true strength resides in flexibility, not rigidity." Eleanor laughed softly, that sound that continued to be Gareth's favorite music. "And I believed I was sacrificing myself for my family's good, using my charms to win over a cold but successful businessman," she responded. "I never imagined I would find a soulmate, someone capable of seeing beyond my facade and valuing my mind as much as my heart." From the garden came children's laughter. Thea supervised an activity with the younger children, organizing an improvised quilting workshop in the open air. With patience and firmness that recalled her father, she assigned tasks and corrected techniques, while Caleb added artistic touches and Willow ran among the participants distributing fabric and tools with overflowing enthusiasm. "Look at them," said Gareth, indicating the scene. "They're the perfect synthesis, aren't they? Not just of us as individuals, but of our cultures, our traditions, our ways of seeing the world." Eleanor nodded, observing their children with evident pride. "Thea has your mental structure and my passion. Caleb has your reflective depth and my expressiveness. And Willow—" Both laughed in unison. "Willow is a completely unique force of nature," completed Gareth, "as if the universe had decided to remind us that, however much we plan, there will always be wonderful surprises waiting for us." From inside the estate came voices and music. Guests were beginning to gather for the formal celebration that would take place that afternoon. Journalists from economic and cultural media, government representatives, artisans, and technologists all congregated to commemorate a decade of an experiment that had transcended the business sphere to become a socio-cultural model with international repercussions. "We should go in," suggested Eleanor. "The speeches will begin soon." But Gareth retained her a moment longer, taking her hands in his with the reverence of one who holds something infinitely precious. "Before we submerge ourselves in the social whirlwind, I wanted to give you something," he said, extracting a small wooden box from his pocket. It wasn't jewelry, as Eleanor had initially expected. Inside rested an old key, ornamented with motifs that combined northern modernist elements and southern arabesques. "What is this?" she asked, intrigued. Gareth's smile widened, revealing the pleasure of one who has prepared a special surprise. "Do you remember that abandoned house near the river in Georgia that you always liked? The one with those incredible views of the countryside?" Eleanor's eyes widened with surprise. "You bought it?" Gareth nodded, pleased by her reaction. "I've been secretly restoring it over the last year. Architects from Savannah and artisans from the Bridge have worked together to conserve its historic essence while adapting it to be our southern refuge. Eleanor examined the key with incredulity, passing her fingers over the intricate details. "We've always spent more time in Northern Territory," continued Gareth. "The estate, New York, the center in Virginia. I thought it was time to balance the scales, a place where we can immerse ourselves in your roots, where the children can connect more deeply with that part of their heritage." Emotion overwhelmed Eleanor, leaving her momentarily speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice was charged with feeling. "10 years later, you continue to surprise me, Gareth Prescott." She kissed him deeply, a kiss that contained all they had lived and all that was to come, all the gratitude for the path traveled, and all the anticipation for the paths yet to explore. When they separated, Gareth kept his forehead resting against hers, sharing the same air, the same space, the same certainty of having found, against all odds, a love that transcended contracts, cultures, and old fears. "And I intend to continue surprising you for many more decades," he promised in a low voice, "because each day with you is a new discovery, a new synthesis, a new bridge between worlds we believed separate, but that were always destined to meet." The celebration at the estate was memorable. Moving speeches alternated with performances that fused Appalachian and Southern folk music, Northern and Southern cuisine, tradition and innovation. Montgomery Prescott, emotional to the point of tears, symbolically handed over the definitive leadership baton to Gareth and Eleanor, officially confirming what in practice was already a reality, that the next generation was ready to take the family legacy to new heights. At the end of the evening, when the last guests had departed and the children slept exhausted after a day of emotions, Gareth and Eleanor found themselves again on the terrace. The New York night enveloped them with its mantle of stars. The same sky that hundreds of miles away illuminated the Georgia hills, where a newly restored house awaited their first visit. "You know what's most beautiful about all this?" reflected Eleanor, contemplating the horizon where the distant lights of neighboring towns punctuated the darkness. "What?" asked Gareth, encircling her with an arm. "That our children will never know the false dichotomy that we had to overcome," she responded with serenity. "For them, there will be no contradiction between being Northern and Southern, between valuing efficiency and cultivating spontaneity, between meticulously planning and letting themselves be surprised by life. Their identity won't be a choice between opposites, but a harmonious integration of multiple heritages." Gareth nodded, deeply understanding the importance of what she expressed. "It's the true bridge we've built," he said. "Not just in Virginia, not just in companies or projects, but in our children. A living bridge that will connect generations, that will carry the best of our traditions to a future we can't even imagine." They remained silent a moment, letting the magnitude of this shared legacy resonate between them. It wasn't just a business empire or an innovative philosophy, but a way of being in the world that transcended the material, a wisdom embodied in concrete lives. Finally, Eleanor turned to Gareth, her eyes shining with the same determination he had glimpsed fleetingly that first day in his office, when a young Southern woman had entered his ordered life to completely transform it. "The original contract expired years ago," she said with a mischievous smile. "I think it's time to draft a new one." Gareth arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of contract do you propose?" Eleanor took his hands in hers, her expression becoming serious and solemn. "One without legal clauses or negotiable terms, a commitment for the next 10 years, and the 10 after those, and all that are granted to us. A contract to continue building bridges between us when new differences arise, between our children and their roots, between the past we honor and the future we create together." Emotion overwhelmed Gareth, who nodded slowly. "I accept all the terms," he responded with a husky voice, "without reservations, without conditions." They kissed under the starry sky, sealing a pact that transcended legal documents and formal signatures. A commitment born not from necessity or calculation, but from the profound certainty of having found each in the other, not just a life companion, but a co-creator of possibilities that individually they could never have imagined. In the adjoining room, Thea had awakened and silently observed her parents through the window. At her young age, she intuited the depth of the bond that united them, a love that had transcended cultural and personal differences to create something new and beautiful. Someday, she thought as she returned to her bed, she would find her own way to build bridges, to integrate apparent contradictions, to create syntheses that honored her parents' legacy while opening new possibilities. While the estate slept under the New York sky, two hearts beat in unison, connected by an invisible but indestructible bridge they had built step by step, day by day, overcoming old fears and discovering new truths. A bridge that not only united New York and Georgia, north and south, reason and passion, but extended to a horizon of infinite possibilities, to a future where differences didn't separate but enriched, where apparent opposites didn't compete but danced together in a harmony that transcended the sum of its parts. And thus, in the quietude of that American night, the contract that had begun as a calculated transaction completed its transformation into what it had always been destined to be, a pact of love that needed no signatures or seals because it was written in the universal language of hearts that have found their home in each other.